Hey scholars, welcome back to our last two sections of chapter 1, where we're looking at why do we have environmental problems and what are the four core sustainable principles of the entire book and of environmental science. So why do we have environmental problems? Let's take a look at that today. The experts identified at least 5 basic causes, major causes of environmental problems. I strongly encourage you to kind of think about these as you go into the first quiz, as well as just overall throughout the book. But population growth is the number one. The second one is the imbalance of resource use, so wasteful and unsustainable resource use. Third one is poverty. Actually, poverty causes a lot of environmental problems, and we'll discuss that later. But failure to include the harmful environmental costs of goods and services in their market price. So, you look at electronic goods, how much electronics that we have, all those have to be disposed of, and how toxic are they to the environment is not really put into the purchase price of it. Also, the biggest one, and probably is the last one, is the kind of the ignorance of it all, the insufficient knowledge of how nature actually works in dealing with environmental problems and dealing with itself. So those are the main 5: population growth, wasteful and unsustainable resource use, poverty, failure to include environmental costs of goods and services in the market price and what they're purchased for, and insufficient knowledge of how nature works. And there's a little pictorial representation for you of those 5 environmental problems or causes. Poverty. Let's take a look at this one. Poverty has lots of harmful environmental and health effects. Population growth is affected. Malnutrition is a big one, sometimes causing premature death, usually because of limited access to adequate sanitation facilities and clean water. That's where poverty has very harmful environmental effects as well as mostly health effects, number one, first and foremost. Some harmful results of poverty. There's a couple of them. So you look at this is the number of percentage of the world's population that actually have adequate sanitation facilities, 38%, which is less than 50. Enough fuel to heat and cook foods, 29%. Electricity, 29%. Clean drinking water, only 16% have clean drinking water. Adequate health care, 16%. Adequate housing, 15%. So you look at, overall in the world, you think about all these things. These are things we take for granted every single day, but a majority of the world does not have these. They're luxury. So kind of just an interesting thought there. This word affluence. It says affluence has harmful and beneficial environmental effects. Affluence is basically wealth. And sometimes you'll see either the book or maybe your test can refer to this term called affluenza. And it's kind of like influenza, but it's not sickness. It's literally problems that are associated with being wealthy. So that's what affluenza means, or affluence. And so some of the good things, the harmful environmental impacts are due to high levels of consumption, unnecessary waste use, but it can be a good thing by allowing that money could provide funding for developing technologies to reduce pollution, environmental degradation, resource waste. Those are all 3 things that money can be put into to help that. Does the money go there? Most often not, but that is one that can be a positive, beneficial effect, but there are some harmful effects too. The prices, another one of the prices do not include the value of natural capital. Companies do not pay the environmental costs of resource use. They can extract the resources, and make them into what they want, but they don't have to pay for what they do to the environment more often than not. The goods and services aren't included, they don't include those harmful environmental costs, so you're not paying for your new iPhone, how much bad or how much degradation I do on natural capital. You're not paying for that. You're paying for the product. Companies receive tax breaks and subsidies in order to do something to have some of their goods and services. So that's just kind of hurting the environment even more. They're kind of more of a cause. An economy may be stimulated, but there may be degradation of natural capital, which is kind of the problem, which is why we're talking about environmental science. So some people need to take different views about environmental problems and their solutions, going back to kind of the social capital of it all, the human influence there. And there are a couple of different ways at looking at environmental ethics. There's 3 basic ways. The first one is planetary management worldview, which is where we need to separate ourselves from nature. Nature only exists to meet our needs. We're kind of above it, and it is only suitable for our increasing wants. And there's kind of the middle person, the stewardship worldview. We can and should manage the earth for our benefit, but we should do it responsibly for the next generation. And then finally, the more hippie of the bunch, the environmental wisdom worldview. We're a part of it and totally dependent on nature, and that nature exists for all species, not just for us. If I were self-reflecting on those three, I would probably put myself in between the bottom two. That's just me. Between stewardship and environmental wisdom. We can learn to make more informed environmental decisions. So that was one of our main problems, was just ignorance. By conducting scientific research, identifying problems, and looking at multiple solutions, and also considering human values and nature values all in one. So those are a couple of things, and most of you know this, the steps of this scientific method: identify the environmental problem, gather information, propose a solution, project a short-term or long-term advantages both for environmental and economical, but also decide on implement the solution, evaluate your consequences, and then revise the decision as needed. That's kind of the basic steps, not only of scientific method, but really of making good environmental decisions as well. Again, we can work together to solve environmental problems. This is what we call social capital. It encourages openness and communication and cooperation and hope and all those things, and it discourages closed-mindedness, polarization, butting heads, and confrontation and fear. So social capital can be a very, very big part of solving environmental problems. And one I'm going to give you an example is the case study of Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's on page 21 of your textbook, on your virtual textbook. And it's a success story based off of social capital and building social capital. In the 1960s, Chattanooga, Tennessee was one of the most polluted cities in the U.S. Mostly its air was so polluted by smoke from its steel mills that people sometimes had to turn on their vehicle headlights in the middle of the day just to see through the smoke. That's how bad it was. In 1984, they had this thing called Vision 2000, which was basically a 20-week series of community meetings in which more than 1,700 citizens from all walks of life gathered to build a consensus about what the city could be at the turn of the century. So they came up with a vision for the city in a 20-week series. Kind of a big deal. They came up with some goals. They set goals. They brainstormed ideas, and they came back together in 1995. Well, by 1995 they met most of their goals, and then they met again in 1993. Well, I guess this was before. 95 they reached their goals. 93 they kind of started revising some things, and in 2000, revision 2000, 1993, this happened where the goals were basically they actually increased some of their goals. And did some of the things, like one of them was to transform an abandoned and blighted area of southern Chattanooga into a mixed community of residents, retail stores, and zero emissions industries. So that was one of their main goals. And again, they're one of the more cleanlier cities now. So they kind of switched the whole script on their city and what it looked like back then to what it is now. One person that really we're talking about a lot throughout the course of the semester, and I throw up quotes by him all the time, is this guy by the name of Aldo Leopold. He is one of my favorite environmental scientists of all time. He wrote a book called the Sand County Almanac, listed down there. He was the leader of conservation and environmental movements of the 20th century, specifically on how to deal and manage land as a resource. And he just one of those awesome people as far as environmental science goes. Another person, Margaret Mead, was summarized our potential for social. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So that was her philosophy. That social capital, anthropologist Margaret Mead, really stressed social capital and the fact that it really can be huge for the environment and making huge differences. Our last little section is what are the 4 scientific principles of sustainability. We'll refer back to these pretty much almost every chapter of the book, but the major 4 are here. Reliance on solar energy, and this I would definitely know these 4 for the quiz. Reliance on solar energy, biodiversity, population control, and nutrient cycling. And there's a picture on the back side of literally the textbook. If you look at them in class, of these on the back cover there, those are 4 basic sustainable scientific principles of sustainability: reliance on solar energy, biodiversity, nutrient cycling, and population control. I'll leave you with this last slide, which is kind of where we're at, to where we need to be as a society. And the current emphasis is basically this: pollution. We've always relied on pollution cleanup, waste disposal, protecting species, you know, with the Endangered Species Act, environmental degradation, increasing resource use, population growth, depleting and degrading natural capital, when we really need to switch to a society that is more of a sustainability emphasis, where we prevent pollution, we prevent waste, we protect habitat, which then in turn protects species. We environmentally restore instead of degrade. We use less resource, or we waste less resources. You know, we need to figure out a way to stabilize our population as a whole and protect our natural capital. When we do this, the world will be a much better place. And I won't be teaching this class anymore. I'll be done teaching this class, and I'll switch on to something else, probably change careers if this ever happened. But again, that's why I'm here, trying to get ourselves to shift from that red mindset to that green mindset. We'll see you guys next chapter with chapter 2.